Buonasera a tutti. Stiamo aspettando.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're waiting for the participants to connect, and we shall start our webinar in just a few minutes. Let me remind you that you can follow the conference in your own language. You have 5 languages available, and you can select your preferred channel. We shall begin in just a few minutes.
Tra pochi minuti daremo avvio al webinar. Vi ricordo solo che
we shall start in a few minutes. Let me just remind you that in the bottom part of the Zoom screen, you can choose your language.
Buonasera a tutti, benvenuti a tutti. Diamo inizio al webinar. Stiamo aspettando ancora qualche secondo per andare live su YouTube e poi daremo ufficialmente
We're
inizio.
waiting just a few moments to start our YouTube stream. Let me remind you that you can choose your language in the bottom part of the Zoom screen. You welcome, all of you. We shall start in a few minutes.
Allora diamo ufficialmente inizio al nostro webinar di stasera.
Let's start. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for connecting with us today. We are officially starting our celebration of International Women's Day. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Lavinia Roque Carrera, Secretary General of WUCWO, the World Union of Catholic Women's Organizations, and I will be moderating this meeting today. Thank you for joining us today. First of all, let me give the floor to Maria Zerbino, President of WUCWO.
A minute of silence to implore peace for Ukraine and for the countries of the whole world. Now I will ask the panelists to do so. Cara Characterizes, ti prego di pregare per la pace.
Io prego per tutta la famiglia umana.
I pray for all the human family, wherever a woman, a child, an elderly person are suffering due to war, hunger, injustice, and especially for Ukraine. Dear Elena, over to you.
Reverend Elena, non la sentiamo, se può accendere il suo microfono, per favore.
Reverend Elena Seishin Viviani, This is a prayer for peace of Master Thich Nhat Hanh, who passed away recently. I'm sure that many of you know him. While protesting against the war, we may think we are peaceful people, a representative of peace, but that description does not correspond always to reality. Observing deeply, we realize that the roots of war are present in our lifestyle. If we are not peace, we can't do anything for peace. So it is important to pray for peace and reconciliation. This is my prayer. Thank you. Now, Hamsananda.
We need the help of God. And the Shanti mantra is an invocation for harmony and blessing for all creation. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Amen.
Amen. Dear Nadine, if you please.
Lord, hear our prayer for peace within ourselves, within our communities, within our nation, and with all the people of the world, wishing that mercy is stronger than violence, peace bigger than war, and love deeper than selfish manpower.
Amen. Dear Isabel, if you please.
I'll start by reading from Matthew chapter 5, verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. God of life, we commit into your hands the people of Ukraine. And we also pray for all those that are involved in peace building and peacemaking for the people of Ukraine.
Amen. Querida Mónica, por favor.
Dear Monica, over to you. Lord, faced with the great Ukrainian suffering and the Russian people's suffering and the millions of men, women, and children, we ask for peace with the same words uttered by Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Make me an instrument of your peace, Lord. Where there's hatred, may I bring love. Where there's offense, may I bring forgiveness. Where there's a discord, may I bring union. Where there's error, may I bring truth. Where there's doubt, faith. And where there is despair, may I bring hope. Where there is darkness, may I bring light. Where there is sadness, may I bring joy. Amen. Thank you all. Just by way of the introduction, before giving the floor to our keynote speakers, let me just remind you that today we're gathering here with the representatives of different faiths, different international organizations and ambassadors to try to reflect and dialogue together about women, the crisis arising from pandemic and war, and their innate resilience. In this way, we will try to react as women and men of faith to promote a common action of social friendship and human brotherhood and sisterhood. As many of you know, we come from a 3-year journey encouraged by WUCWO that has engaged us in a process of interreligious dialogue among women builders of fraternity. I am happy that this year we can count on the collaboration of the Pontifical Council of for Interreligious Dialogue and the precious patronage of the embassies to the Holy See of Argentina, Australia, Colombia, Ireland, and the Netherlands. Now I'm giving the floor immediately for the video message that His Eminence Cardinal Miguel Ángel Ayuso Guichot, President of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, sent us for this occasion since he was unable to connect in person.
Union of Catholic Women's Organizations, STEM participants. Today, I bring best wishes to the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue for the success of this webinar, in which you are connected as women from the ecumenical and interreligious circles to celebrate the International Women's Day. I would like to offer thoughts on women drivers of resilience, the theme proposed for the celebration. This webinar will highlight best practices we learn from women in their capacity to live with tensions in ordinary life, but also tragedies caused by war, health crisis, social insecurity, natural disasters, and more. Although in those circumstances, women are often among the vulnerable who ought to be protected, they are also the persevering victims in whose hands lie the responsibility of rescuing their families threatened with annihilation. Though wounded, they stave off discouragement and resist an attitude of defeat. Instead, they fight for life, not giving in to fatalism nor to the trap of vindication. They have a particular capacity to value forgiveness, which provides them with the energy needed to love more, to be creative, to generate, and to sustain life. The past, which they accept with resilience, is marked with tragedies and sorrows, but their feminine lineage makes it transfigured with a spark of light leading to resurrection. Because of that light, pain and sorrows are transformed into stories of regeneration, victories of good over evil, of endurance over cowardliness, of forgiveness over vindication. And the ecumenical and interreligious dimension of this webinar endows it with opportunities to learn from the legacies of people, especially women, who confronted with dire situations drew strength from their spiritual traditions to stand against the destructive power of violence and evil. In fact, each religious tradition has its list of women of character and stories of courage and endurance, such the ones told in the Bible regarding, for example, Sarah, Anna, and also Mary. Those are echoed in the literature of other religious traditions. This webinar will be a success in helping the various denominations and religious traditions recognize in the mix inspirational stories and living examples of resilience. These are drivers of resilience, for their stories challenge society, proposing a feminine standard in projecting a society that promotes the common good and which is beneficial to all. WUCWO cultivates the best practice of looking at the world with Marian eyes. And this cultivation can unveil Mary as a model for daily resilience. She faced all the challenges and moments in her life with courage and character. She was ready to confront the social stigma linked to a pregnancy known only to her and her spouse as miraculous. She had to escape to a foreign land for the safety of her son. She was confronted with tensions of mothering a contradicted charismatic figure. He also agonized at the foot of the cross and embraced the lifeless body of her beloved son. After Easter, she stood in the company of the disciples, sustaining their faith, looking at the world with Marian eyes, shows how throughout her life, Mary was a driver of resilience, teaching by example what mothers do best, as Pope Francis says. They console, they comfort, and they give life. To conclude, considering the enduring health crisis of the COVID pandemic and the escalation of war in the world, particularly in Ukraine, may the lessons and stories learned and shared during this webinar drive resilience to the farthest and darkest corners where people are still trapped in the prisons of fear, anger, animosity, violence, and suffering. And for all participants, I reiterate the words of Pope Francis to the community of Karakosh in Iraq as he addressed the mothers and women of courage, saying that these mothers and women of courage continue to give life in spite of wrongs and hearts. May, dear brothers and sisters, women be respected and protected. May they be shown respect and provided with opportunity. And may the harvest of this webinar, of this event, be really bountiful to all. Thank you very much.
Grazie, ringraziamo molto Sua Eminenza per i suoi
We
auguri.
thank His Excellency very much for his good wishes. I am now pleased to give the floor to Dr. Mary Elizabeth Stewart, General Vice President of WUCWO and Regional Vice President for North America. Mary Beth, over to you.
Thank you. What a great deal we have to celebrate on this International Women's Day, as we acknowledge the immense contributions women make to better our world. From the critical role women play in the family structure to their extraordinary achievements in the cultural, political, and socioeconomic structures of society. As an organization representing over 8 million Catholic women around the globe, the World Union of Catholic Women's Organizations, or WUCWO, is perfectly positioned to know the critical issues that affect the lives of women and has worked tirelessly for the last 112 years at the grassroots level and through our representatives at the United Nations to promote the dignity of all women and girls. This care and action are integral to our identity as Catholic women, called to follow Christ's command to love our neighbor as ourselves. with a mission to promote the presence, participation, and co-responsibility of Catholic women in society and in our church. WUCWO prays and works to advance human rights so that all women and girls will be able to achieve that destiny for which each were uniquely created. In this effort to promote human dignity, WUCWO is filled with joy to see the riches that each and every leader contributes to this ecumenical event with their respective visions determined by their faiths. To carry on together this effort started 3 years ago to examine the issues that have an impact on the lives of women, the work to promote the dignity of every human being, and to encourage careful stewardship of this beautiful planet we inhabit together. We gather today to celebrate that inner core of resilience nurtured by faith that enables women to surmount adversity with strength, courage, and hope. Tenderly, lovingly, yet firmly hold families together and bravely advance our tumultuous world toward the realization that we are all brothers and sisters bound together in our common goals and dreams. I'm sure you now join me in looking forward to today's presentations. Thank you.
Grazie, Mary Beth.
Thank you,
Ora,
Mary Beth.
interventi delle nostre
Let's now
speaker
move
sono donne
to
di diverse comunità
the
religiose.
keynotes
Ci
of our
accompagnano oramai da
speakers,
tempo in
women
questo
leaders
ciclo
from
che
different
ormai
religious communities who have been accompanying
per
us for
sentire le
some
loro
time now on this path of
testimonianze.
ecumenical and interreligious dialogue to hear
Iniziamo con la
their
prospettiva
testimonies on the
islamica,
theme of women, crisis and resilience. We begin with Islamic perspective with the speech by Professor Shahzad Hausman, Iranian theologian, Vice President of the Women's Council of the Pontifical Council for Culture. Professor Shahzad, living in Tehran and thinking about your direct experience, what do you think are the main characteristics of women's resilience in the Middle East? Good afternoon to all my sisters who are following this event with from different cultures, traditions. Let me start with a verse that focus on reciprocity. I'm going to read it in Arabic.
Il Corano in questo 103esimo capitolo, che comprende solo 3
The
versetti,
Quran in this verse shows us the way of the women called to be resilient for themselves and for others, for the human being. It says the human being is a loser unless they act for good. And what is needed is patience and truth. So our gathering today is, the first step toward this stimulus we need in order to be patient and for the truth. I think that women has a natural power of acceptance and welcoming. Why do I say naturally? Well, because the body of a woman itself has the power to welcome life. And I'm referring to a woman's uterus. So women can welcome life and offer life to the world and nourish it with patience and love. I think that today, more than ever, a woman deserves the respect of the humankind which sometimes cannot see a brother or sister to love in the other. So the first page of this document, which is the Carta Magna of today's world, where Pope Francis almost cries out to tell us that if we do not recognize a brother in the other, we will only start more wars. The first chapter of Fratelli Tutti invites us to this. He says, Fratelli Tutti, as Saint Francis of Assisi said, we know that he's the patron saint of Italy. And so he wrote in order to address to all brothers and sisters and suggest them a lifestyle that tastes like gospel. And he invites us to a love that goes beyond the geographical and space barriers. Blessed is the one who loves the other, even if they're far away or very next to one another. Unfortunately, we are witnessing wars, and I think that Pope Francis, thinking to celebrate the World Peace Day of 2022, paves the way for us to build peace. He says in this message that in recent years, globally, the literacy and education rate has diminished while military expenses have increased, going beyond the rate we had before the Great War, and they are bound to grow even more. So if we, as women, do not speak up for a world that invests more time and resources to build weapons and less resources in social justice and acceptance and welcoming the others, while our children will suffer even more in the future. In my own land, in the Middle East, a land I know best, the Middle Eastern woman, the Muslim woman, when she cries, well, her tears have the same taste and color of a Christian or a Jew or a Hindu woman. The tears of women all over the world have the same taste and color. So the Middle Eastern woman, when she sees her own children or other people's children die, tries with all her strength, traditional, religious, and human strength, to restore peace, healing, forgiveness, acceptance, and mercy. I believe that our message as women today could be this one: let's love all children of the earth, not only those who belong to our own region or our own religion or our country. Let's open our soul towards all human beings. The Quran speaks of Rahma, or which refers to the human family, where all children are sons and daughters of the same womb. So let's go back to being mothers capable of accepting and going beyond all barriers. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Charzal, for this very beautiful words. Now, for the Buddhist perspective, we have with us today Reverend Elena Seishin Viviani, Vice President of the Italian Buddhist Union. Let me ask a question to you too. Based on your experience and knowledge, what actions is the Buddhist community in Asia and in Italy carrying out in favor of women and the most vulnerable members of society? Over to you, Reverend Elena Seishin Viviani. Good afternoon to all of you. Thanks to all the organizers, and thank you for your question. Let me start by saying that you mentioned the Buddhist community in Asia and Italy. As a matter of fact, that is the perspective that I'm going to share with you with my contribution, meaning that community to us is really important. And by community, we mean the whole human community. And at the beginning, I quoted Thich Nhat Hanh, who said, next Buddha won't be a person, it will be a community. This way, I think that Buddhists, both Italian or Westerns or Eastern brothers, are walking towards this direction, the direction of a very open community, a community capable of listening to the suffering of the world. Many consider that Buddhism is a passive religious approach, a religious tradition focused on, social issues. So very intimate approach. But as a matter of fact, we can say that there is a committed Buddhism, as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, but there's also a Buddhism that focuses on suffering. And it's the antidote to suffering, that is wisdom. These two aspects, suffering and wisdom, refer to all human beings, particularly women. Let's make a distinction. From our point of view, that refers to each and every one of us. The suffering we're witnessing these days refers to all of us, men, women, children. So resilient women are important, and as is the community these women belong to. So your question was, what is the Buddhist community doing in Asia and in Italy in favor of women and the most vulnerable members of society? Well, there are different fields where we are committed. It is not just about resilience, it is to give voice to the suffering of those many people. And now, if we speak of the female condition abroad, women suffer like in the monastic tradition. There are virtuous examples of women who help other women, nuns, religious, in order to be educated, to study, in order to disseminate the Dharma. And this is not, a small thing, because mostly abroad, the position, the role of a woman is always at the core of social cultural categories that are the heritage of old positions and senses. The same way in China too, there are Buddhist communities that have promoted gender equality. In Tibet as well, where there is an ecclesiastic hierarchy, which is very strong and man-dominated. This has always been very difficult. In fact, now there are many women who can access a religious journey. In order to keep cultures and traditions alive. And these nuns, more than 600 nuns, could access to training courses, formation courses, and this is a major change paradigm. And these are examples of resilience abroad. And we have many more examples. You know, I'm thinking about children, another category of society which is heavily affected in Italy and abroad. As Buddhists, we are committed to education, for example, to introduce themes, modalities, and tools that are suitable to build a peaceful mindset, a peaceful mind, a mind that is capable of building peace. In the last 2 years of pandemic and fragility, huge inequalities have emerged as to childhood and children and young people. So again, this is another part of our society that is suffering. And so there were many women who were helped to find or restore a balance that was lost. We are working with schools now to introduce elements in the schools in terms of soft skills useful to restore a broken childhood or teenage, which was heavily affected by the pandemic. And lastly, when we speak of community and networking, we also speak about that in religious terms. So I'd like to mention a project in which we're collaborating with the Italian Bishops' Conference to create humanitarian corridors in Afghanistan's neighboring countries. And there are women who have important roles in society, who are very important to ensure continuity. Thank you very much. Thank you, Reverend, and many wishes to you and your community. Thank you for being with us today. Now, let me hand over to Swamini Hamsananda Giri, Vice President of the Italian Hindu Union. Swamini Hamsananda Giri, given your participation in the group of reference of Hindu communities around the world, can you tell us about the critical situation, but also the resilience of Hindu migrant women in Italy and elsewhere during the pandemic? Yes, thank you and good afternoon to all of you. Thanks again for inviting me to this event. Can I share my screen, please? Because I'd like to show you the faces of these women. I chose just, to be their voice. Can you see my screen?
Ah, ok. Vedevate la presentazione?
Sì.
Ok. Bene. Ecco, quindi vorrei, come dicevo, vorrei semplicemente
So I would like to give voice to these women. Women without a voice in migration, who suffer from a devastating isolation, being far from everything, relatives, friends, from those who speak their own language. If they become victims of violence, they cannot even ask for help. They are suspended in time. They're creatures of God who are meek and suffer the great evil, the ignorance that provokes, enables, and conveys violence. The pandemic can only have burdened them with so much pain. Who can save them? Their faith, their resilience. Because it is precisely the power of self-control that has made women strong, vital, and creative over the centuries, despite the burden of great sacrifices in enduring, giving life. Women have been able to enhance the noblest of qualities. In short, their ability to care. In this short time, I would like to unveil a polyphony of women active in the service of the world, volunteers, peace builders, builders of solidarity who bear witness to the resilience through the golden thread that unites them, the strength of faith. It is only through the strength of the spirit that actions in the world become great. Shashikala. She says, in these sad times, we have found abundant time for introspection. Hinduism attaches great importance to inner awareness and promotes the acceptance of reality as it is, without opposing it. Now, this cultural and religious attitude, which is not passive, is a search for harmony, has helped us much. And Sanatana Dharma provides many means to raise the mind and senses to a higher state of consciousness. And tapas is the constant work on oneself for the development of awareness. Svadhyaya is the study of sacred texts. Ishwara Pranidhana is the constant dedication to the divine in works. Indian women have always been faithful to these three principles. The pandemic has re-emphasized the importance of paying attention to the self in relation to community and a sincere study of and the daily practice of prayer and meditation. Ritika. During the COVID pandemic, people who needed care, such as the elderly, suffered greatly. Suddenly, in an almost surreal way, as in a cruel game of fading memory, everything just disappeared. Relatives, the volunteers, the activities, everyone in the vicinity had their faces and bodies completely covered by gowns and masks. Fear gripped every corner of our work. Fear from work felt like a stone on the family. We all had to be separated. No more hugs and no more hugs and kisses. And in this suspension, my religion became a fundamental tool. That inner calm that I seek every day in dialogue with God became precious in calming the storm that was brewing. The Lord's presence in the world is the Dharma. I tried to follow the rules scrupulously and helped other people to follow them in turn. Happiness is to do one's duty with joy. I prayed and felt that the prayers of the whole community were my own. This increased my strength. We become tireless workers and super careful mothers at home. A transformation of that flow of love, strength, and gift from Bhagavan, the Lord. Bharati. In 2020, the first year of the pandemic, the mental state of every Indian family was dominated by fear and frailty. A state of mental and physical depression hovered over, and people suffered from panic attacks. During this period, women had to build strong mental resilience for themselves and their families. The biggest challenge at all levels was multitasking and working very efficiently, taking care of health, cooking healthy food, procuring medicines and home remedies for the whole family, and organizing volunteer work for the needy. Women had to reinforce their role as mediators, managing family conflicts and stress in the home to ensure a peaceful and positive atmosphere while recovering traditional values. During this pandemic, we went back to following the traditional routine of dinacharya by eating healthy meals at home, following good habits of cleanliness, mental purity, working together for a future building education, taking care of oneself, others, and every living being. Ella Gandhi, the granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi. My faith in my religion, particularly in the practice of meditation, has accustomed me both to isolation and at the same time to engaging in socially useful work, and that has allowed me to overcome these oppressive conditions and never feel overwhelmed. We also started group chats. We participated in webinars, made contact with friends and families, even if only to say good morning or good evening. Together, we have overcome tragedies. My nephew died to COVID, as did many other friends, and the heartbreak of not being able to be united in grief, in saying goodbye, in accompanying the necessary rituals was enormous. However, once again, my faith came to my aid. It was invaluable, believing that the body dies and dies again in a cyclical time, but the soul survives and moves on to fulfill its destiny, gave a certain balm to the pain. Such conviction gives us comfort and understanding that grief is only for ourselves, for our loss, but not for the departed soul who is on the bright path on its journey to God. And the lesson that emerges even more from these difficult times is to learn to live a good, just life centered on moral values, dedicating one's service to others. Empathy, compassion, and love must be at the forefront of our lives. If these pillars are firmly established in us, then they make us capable of always extending a helping hand to others. The contentment and peace of mind that come from such acts are far superior to anything material we can acquire. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. Thank you also for giving voice to these women through these testimonies of faith. Now, for the Jewish perspective, we now hear from Professor Nadine Yarchi, President of the Interfaith and Intercultural Committee of the International Council of Jewish Women. Given the Jewish communities are truly present all over the world, I would like to ask you, as women, how can we each in our own country and in our own community help the refugees who so assiduously find themselves in situations of hardship as we are seeing in these days? Professor, you need to unmute yourself, please.
Done. Thank you. I would like first to start with the definition of the word resilience that we use that much this afternoon. And I took the definition by Professor Dr. Boris Cyrulnik. He says it's stand up against ordeals and overcome them later in the future. So if you took this in mind, I go further. And from my Jewish perspective, I have only to look at the history of the Jewish people as excellent, pity enough, examples of resilience. Over the centuries, it was their resilience, mostly of the women, that enabled them to survive homelessness, pogroms, hostility, persecution, isolation, and violence. It was also their belief in God that helped them facing the future and never giving up. I go very far in history. I go in the Bible, where we find the story of Abraham, Sarah, and their son Isaac. Isaac was born to his parents when they were already very old, and he was the answer to their prayers. Yet God needed to test Abraham's faith. Abraham's obeyed to sacrifice his son Isaac. My question is, how did Sarah cope with this impending loss? Did she rely on her faith? Did she trust her husband to find a solution? Of course, we don't know. But it couldn't be easy to continue after this episode without trauma. The story is not about Sarah, but we understand from history that she played an important part. Her faith in God allowed her to trust her husband, accepting God's decree. And so Isaac was saved. Another example, on the island of Curaçao in Willemstad, there is a wooden synagogue late 18th century dedicated to the four mothers of Judaism, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel. Why? Because during the Spanish Inquisition, the women continued to bring children into the world and educate them in the tradition of their forefathers. They showed resilience and determination to ensure that the future was safe for their people. During World War II, in some camps, a few women were lucky to survive, and after the war, they rebuilt their lives, and I named as example Simone Weil, who as a child was the only survivor of her family and became later minister in France. The same happened with families in hiding. Once the war was over, some were able to take the thread of their life back from where they left it before the war. But for a lot, it was not possible. They were alone with nobody to rely on, even if Jewish solidarity organizations were doing their almost best to help them to rebuild their lives. Across the world, Jewish organizations have started to help the East European Jewish immigrants to settle in new countries, and this starting in 1800. The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, HIAS, works now around the world to protect all refugees who have been forced to flee their homeland. My own women's organization, International Council of Jewish Women, was created in 1912 in Berlin to help young women to avoid prostitution. So solidarity is with the needed is part of Jewish DNA. A few decades ago, a family from an Eastern European country reached Antwerp, my city. Why did they leave their country where both got a good job as medical doctors? Because they were Jewish. In their country, the old misunderstanding still existed. If you kidnap children, Jewish children, all the community will pay to get them back. And the price must be high because Jews are rich. So this family one evening took their car with the 2 children, left everything behind and reached Belgium. They passed here in Belgium through interrogation, cross-interrogation, were placed in refugee camp. It was awful. All this broke the spirit of the husband, but not of his wife. She started to study medicine again in a language she never heard before, so their future will be preserved. And she succeeded. We know them personally, and we know that we are not allowed to speak about their life in the refugee camps. In Belgium, all the faiths together, all over their diversity, put some money together to pay the integration of some refugees coming through a humanitarian corridor under the know-how of Saint Egidio. And maybe this could be an idea in big cities where women of all faiths and of all color, whatever, could volunteer to help refugees to settle. What we live nowadays in Europe is a threat to our democratic way of life. During the 2 years of COVID-19 with the lockdowns, some people, once their usual habits were changed, they fell into depression. Others found the energy to follow workshops through internet and learned totally other subjects. Some others started to write books. The examples are multiple. So my conclusion is that you reach resilience through religion's faith, belief in humanity and mankind, and solidarity between people, whatever. Thank you.
Grazie a lei, Nadine, per aver anche
Thank you, Nadine, for sharing with us these very interesting stories. Now, for the ecumenical perspective, Professor Isabel Apavo-Firi is with us this year too. She's the Deputy Secretary General of the Ecumenical Council of Churches. Professor Firi, with your great experience and commitment within the World Council of Churches, your commitment to the Black Thursday campaign for a world without violence against women and the dialogue we have established in recent years, I'd like to ask you if you can tell us about the pain of women and their resilience from an ecumenical and African perspective. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Lavinia. And thank you to the organizers, for inviting me the second time or the third time, to be part of this conversation. I want to start by looking at the Fratelli Tutti, chapter 1, which talks about the bleak picture of dark clouds over a closed world and of its people who, torn into pieces, have uprooted historical consciousness on the memory of many people concerning the shared world and shared values among inhabitants of the world. This is extremely problematic as it presents a picture of the one who, according to the book of James in the Christian Bible, sees their images in the mirror, and once they have moved away, forget and subsequently follow their own interest, but are detached by the historical consciousness of the shared world. Across the African continent, unfortunately, during the COVID period, there are increased reports of incidents of sexual, gender-based violence, hunger, poverty, and child marriages. The examples are many, and it's difficult for me to actually give you specific examples, but I've got them in the paper that I had written, but I'm not going to share the examples. But then I also want to say that, Africa in general suffered, because of not enough vaccines, for everyone. And the fact that, people concentrated on, sharing vaccines among, the rich countries and the poor countries, continue to suffer. However, despite the challenges, faced, African women of all regions remain resilient in the face of untold and unprecedented setbacks. Since the spread of COVID-19 pandemic in Africa, as was the case with the HIV and AIDS, women have been unwavering caregivers, turning homes into care centers, affirming dignity and humanity despite the enforced distancing and sanitization requirements. In countries like Ghana, many more women became breadwinners, thus earning them a voice in decision-making. And I could also give examples of the women of South Sudan who struggled, because of sexual and gender-based violence, but still, used their voice to begin to distribute food, menstrual hygiene materials, and wanting to encourage, girls to go back to school and study. And I want to talk about the work of the WCC. Globally, and especially in Africa, the World Council of Churches Thursday in Black campaign has been adopted by churches, schools, ecumenical organizations, and people of goodwill, with the aim of ending sexual and gender-based violence. Subsequently, the WCC has supported and invested in strengthening African women's agency during the COVID-19 pandemic through webinars and podcasts addressing safety concerns in COVID-19. 2, online Bible study series addressing land rights and food insecurity. And 3, a radio campaign to curb rape and violence in Togo. And 4, the publication of a church school curriculum on children's rights in Francophone Africa. And 5, formation of a university mentorship program in East Africa to foster safe spaces and address toxic masculinities and femininities. And 6, as well as providing training on women's human rights and using UN mechanisms to advocate for justice and human dignity. We recognize that this cannot effect the change we need by itself. Nevertheless, with the joint efforts of everyone, we can prevent the efforts of dehumanizing consciousness to realize a world that strengthens resilience and justice, not only for African women burdened by the impact of COVID-19, but all women everywhere. I thank you.
Grazie a lei, professoressa Firi, per averci dato questa...
Thank you, Professor Firi, for sharing with us this overview of the situation in Africa. Thank you for sharing with us the initiatives of the WCC. Let's now move to the Catholic perspective. Professor Monica Santamarina Noriega is with us. She has always worked in Catholic organizations in favor of women and children, and who is currently the General Treasurer of WUCWO. Monica, can you tell us the most important results of the first work of the World Observatory of Women of WUCWO carried out in Latin America and the Caribbean together with the Latin American Bishops' Council? Thank you, Lavinia, and good afternoon to each one of you. In June 2021, the World Union of Catholic Women's Organizations, WUCWO, decided to create the World Observatory of Women to give visibility to women, especially the most vulnerable, whose sufferings and potential seem invisible, in order to inspire and generate pastoral strategies of the Catholic Church and religious bodies or other faiths, synergies on the part of other NGOs, public policies of states, and contributions to the international agenda that favor the integral human development of women and their families, communities, and peoples. Thus, in alliance with the Latin American Episcopal Council, we carried out the first work on the impact of COVID-19 on women in Latin America and the Caribbean, with a mainly, but not exclusively, qualitative value. Now, this work consists of three parts. In the first one, the state of the art, data from international agencies such as the UN and ECLAC are collected to demonstrate the state of the question from their own quantitative perspective. The second part, the experts report, offers the result of the dialogue established with 25 experts from 14 countries in the region with different profiles, languages, and roles. Experts because of their specific participation in the community in which they are leaders or in which they provide their services. Finally, the survey report reflects the results of a known statistical sample of women from 23 Latin American and Caribbean countries with testimonies about their experiences during the pandemic, collected through open-ended questions. Each part concludes with a theological pastoral contribution. Here are some of the most important conclusions. From the state of the art, I'd like to underline that most of the studies consulted pointed to negative impacts of the pandemic and of the measures taken by governments in response to it. The deterioration of the structural situation of inequality in women's lives is evident. I'd like to highlight the increase in gender-based violence and the restriction or denial of some rights, such as the protection of life, health, and physical and mental integrity. The impoverishment and the consequent increase in the feminization of poverty, the precariousness of employment with a greater contraction of employment for women, especially in the most feminized sectors, and the increase in the digital divide in access to education and teleworking, especially among the most vulnerable. From the meetings with experts, and here are some of the voices and experiences shared by them and corroborated in the surveys. Violence, the other pandemic, confinement has increased the violence against women of all ages, often with the aggressor at home and unable to denounce him. Women as commodities. Human trafficking has increased with the pandemic due to increased poverty and forced migration, often corrupt governments and police, and new strategies of recruitment and commercialization of victims. Migration has increased in search of better opportunities or survival. Indigenous women who used to make a living with their handicrafts or farm products ended up begging in the streets with their children. Migration has made it difficult for them to preserve their cultural identity and live with dignity. Fear of hunger rather than COVID. Millions of women suddenly had no income for survival. COVID no longer mattered as much. Education, almost mission impossible. The virtualization of basic education has been one of the greatest challenges. Lack of internet connection, signal, electricity, and adequate mobile phones, coupled with the poor preparation of mothers, made it very tiring or even impossible to accompany their children in their studies. For the teachers, this meant an extra effort. Death in solitude, the deaths and the impossibility of saying goodbye and mourning and leaving the mourning processes and rites of mourning of loved ones have been the most painful cases. Then denied access to healthcare, medical services were overwhelmed and limited to COVID-19 and serious urgencies, resulting in many other silent and preventable deaths. The overload of work on women's shoulders and their physical and emotional exhaustion from taking on so many responsibilities were evident. And on the other hand, the women found solidarity and support in the church, which discovered new ways to be present in the pandemic. Many felt closer to God and deepened their spirituality and faith life. However, the closure of the churches had an impact on them because of the space that they lost and the inactivity that limited their participation in the pastoral work. Finally, the lights in the storm. In answering the questionnaire, many women finally found and appreciated the time to reflect on themselves and speak freely. Despite of the conflicts, many families met again and took the opportunity to get to know each other better and to live together. Despite the persistence of stereotypes and roles traditionally assigned to women, many enriched their self-knowledge, self-esteem, and personal development or formation. Women's strength and resilience in dealing with the crisis manifested itself in various ways. It was women who provided support for their husbands or partners, parents, and children. It was women who often became the sole providers for the household, sneaking out in the early hours of the morning to sell their wares and get food. It was them who cared for and looked after their elderly or sick parents and their helpless children. As Nadine and Professor Firi have told us, women have become community Samaritans. Beside being resilient, they used to caring for their own and others. They were quick to react and show solidarity. We will share all our results in the near future. In the meantime, at WUCWO, we have observed, listened to, and touched the lives of thousands of suffering, vulnerable women, but also strong, resilient, and courageous women. We have shared, sometimes heartbroken, their experiences, challenges, and achievements. We therefore commit ourselves to continue working with all our energy, capacity, and possibilities with the Lord's help, and hopefully with the help of women leaders of other religions, so that all over the world, women will finally be made visible and women's rights will be respected. Women are finally made visible, heard, valued, taken into account, and supported. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Monica, for presenting the results of the observatory. Thank you very much to all our speakers. After all these speeches or interventions, if there is still time, we will make room for some questions from the audience. So for those of you who are listening, if you wish, please prepare a question or comment and write it in the chat box. If it is a question, please specify to whom it is addressed. Let me now give the floor to our ambassadors who are today connected with us and who have helped us sponsor today's conference. Let me give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Hannens. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be invited to address you to mark International Women's Day. And I want to thank especially the World Union of Catholic Women's Organizations for inviting me. I would also like to thank members of the panel for their varied and stimulating contributions. They've been extremely interesting. Thank you. Now, as I have been asked to be brief, I will get straight to the substance, which is addressing how women in Ireland have coped with the challenges of the COVID pandemic. Like elsewhere, the pandemic has had an unprecedented effect on all aspects of Irish society. Caring responsibilities in particular, with children at home from school, for example, fell more heavily on women's shoulders. Almost half of businesses which responded to a survey by the Irish Employers Organisation, IBEC, last year, said more women than men had requested changes to their work patterns to facilitate caring responsibilities. 1/3 of respondents said that more of their female employees than their male counterparts had requested unpaid leave to facilitate caring responsibilities in the previous 12 months. The pandemic had a deep impact on women who were going through a pregnancy during lockdown. Women had to attend appointments without the support of their spouse or partner. Indeed, this was acknowledged in remarks by the Irish Minister for Children in Parliament to mark International Women's Day in 2021. He noted, "The past year has been particularly difficult for women. Many have experienced important milestones, including pregnancy, alone, even the birth of their child alone. Moments which would have, in normal circumstances, been shared with the partner or a close friend or family member." Shamefully too, women in Ireland, as elsewhere, experienced an increase in domestic violence, and this has been touched on by some speakers, and abuse during the lockdowns. The Women's Aid Organisation noted in its report for 2020 a 43% increase in contacts for its services when compared with 2019. In a speech last year, former President of Ireland and former UN High Representative for Human Rights, Mary Robinson, called on governments everywhere to address the intersecting issues faced by women and girls in their pandemic recovery plans. Mrs. Robinson said, and I quote, "Crises are never gender neutral, and COVID-19 is no exception. Violence against women has increased. Women are losing their livelihoods faster than men. Millions of women carry a disproportionate responsibility for caregiving. The United Nations uses the phrase, 'Build Back Better,' But I don't believe we should go back at all. Now is the time for us to build forward. We need to build forward for justice, for equality, for sustainability, unquote. Of course, amid the many downsides of the COVID pandemic for women, there have been bright spots too. In Ireland, many women have welcomed the opportunity to work from home, and rather than wasting time stuck in traffic or on public transport, have been able to spend precious time with their children at home. So much so that now that the worst of the pandemic appears to be over, they want the option to continue working remotely. Responding to this and recognizing the benefits for society as a whole in nurturing closer ties within families, the Irish government has introduced legislation enshrining the right to work from home, subject to certain conditions. If this legislation passes as expected, some positive deliverable will have emerged from a very difficult 2 years for women. Thank you.
Grazie a lei, ambasciatore, anche per la sua partecipazione oggi con noi. E ora do la parola
Thank you, Ambassador. Let me give the floor to Her Excellency Maria Fernanda da Silva, Ambassador of Argentina before the Holy See. Good afternoon, everyone, to all men and women present. Thank you, Maria Lia Zervino, for inviting me. You're the president of WUCWO, and so I cannot not mention it because you are a countrywoman to me. We are both Argentinian, so I think we should hold this gathering once a month, because I think it is very important that we continue talking about these themes. I know I have just a few minutes, but after having listened to all those very interesting contributions, what I can say, well, in March, on the 27th of March, 2 years ago, I just remember Pope Francis in St. Peter's Square saying, we are in the midst of a storm. And the Holy Father blessed us, Urbi et Orbis. You remember March the 27th, 2 years ago, and he named the pandemic. He said, nobody is safe alone. And if that is true, well, that speaks of our existence and the existence of every one of us, linked to the existence of other people. Life is not just a time that goes by, it is a time of encounter, as Pope Francis says. In all the extraordinary, excellent contributions of people who spoke before myself, they say that the existence of the many women we were representing here today, both visible and non-visible, our existence, collective existence, our existence as a community is memory, is a choreography, is history. My colleague from Ireland quoted Mary Robinson, the great Mary Robinson. She spoke very beautiful words. So thank you, Ambassador, for quoting her. The crisis is not the same for everyone. You see, we represent women, those women who are victim of a patriarchal structure of violence, of the culture of privilege, of the colonial thinking, the migrants who experienced racial difficulties, the Shoah. We are sisters, and ours is not just a resilience, it's also insistence. There are many women part of different groups and collectives in Latin America and in the global south, because we try to share our thinking. Unfortunately, we are not present in the decision-making instances. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. Therefore, I would like to invite all of you to think about these concepts. We are not an eternal present, you see. We are history. When Nadine or Isabel spoke, I thought this has so much to do with those who came before us. When we tell something about ourselves, we truly highlight our existence together with others. We highlight the importance of encounter. Life is not an eternal present, an eternal present time. So we need to be resilient and insistent and resistant. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we need to try and live this re-existence, if I may, because something went lost, something was broken. Since 2002, something has changed, but I would also like to say something about poverty. 86 million people in Latin America are starving, really. In some places, they live better than in the Southern Hemisphere, but maybe in Central America. But what we want to do is create a world where existence is inclusive and sustainable, to create this common home for us, men and women. I know that I have just a few minutes available. However, it is important to keep smiling. This is why you see me smiling, because people should recognize us Christians through or thanks to our smiling faces. As Pope Francis says, we need to dream. We never have to stop dreaming a world, a better world that will come. I'm sure of that. So thank you. And let me thank all my sisters connected here from Latin America and Africa, Asia, all continents. These are my countries too. So in Argentina, we too have many migrants and we welcome them with joy. So sisters, let's unite again soon. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're very happy of having a voice to say that with the pandemic or without a pandemic, we resist each and every day to any pandemic, even those pandemics that tell us how we need to speak or behave. Thank you, Ambassador. Let me give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Chiara Porro, Ambassador of Australia to the Holy See. Over to you.
Thank you, Lavinia, and also to Maria Lia for the opportunity to say a few words today and for gathering this incredible group of women and men to talk on this very important topic. I was particularly struck by the different but very united perspectives across religions on the importance of gender equality and women's empowerment. When we think about women, crisis and resilience, we know that women and girls, as others have mentioned, are disproportionately affected in crises, whether it's war, a global pandemic, or disasters and other climate threats. Women and girls die in greater numbers and have different and uneven levels of resilience and capacity to recover. And why is this? It's because 70% of the 1.3 billion people living in poverty are women and girls. And we shouldn't forget that. It's because they are much more dependent on natural resources and subsistence labor. For example, women predominate the world's food production, making up around 50 to 80% of this, but they own less than 10% of the land. And as a result, are much more susceptible during times of crisis. And the data, as the Women's Observatory has shown, is that crises lead to increased rates of gender-based violence, including sexual harassment, child marriage, exploitation of children, human trafficking, destroying the lives and potential of many women and girls. But as we've also heard today, women are not passive victims. They're on the front lines. They are effective and powerful leaders and change makers, including to prevent the worst effects of crises. Yet women's voices, their agency, their leadership, and their participation are under-supported, under-resourced, and undervalued. And I think this is where we should, where the focus needs to be. Their capacities are unleveraged in conventional resilience building and decision-making processes. So one of the things in Australia that we do is we make sure that all our development programs, all our efforts are gender responsive. So they really integrate women's knowledge, experiences and concerns into all stages of our programs, their design, their delivery. It's very much about promoting social inclusion and gender equality, and it's really a cross-cutting issue for us across all the work we do internationally. One of our focuses being on the other side of the world is the Pacific region, which is one of the most crisis-prone regions in the world. And in 2021, we launched with UN Women, which is the United Nations agency dedicated to gender equality and women's empowerment, the Women's Resilience to Disasters program, which is very much focused on working with women to find local solutions, including for preparedness and early warning systems, appropriate response services and products, and really supporting the development of resilient livelihoods and businesses for women. We also recently launched, and I can share the details of this for anyone interested, a Women's Resilience Knowledge Hub, which shares good practice and advocacy on women's leadership for disaster crisis resilience. It offers a wealth of resources to help communities reduce risks and really develop processes and practices that truly respond to women's needs. This will help to replicate and upscale UN Women's work in the Pacific, including to other regions. So these resources, for example, are already being used in the Caribbean and also the Lake Chad Basin, for example. So just to conclude, as I know I just had a few minutes, I do want to pay tribute really to all the women and some of whom we have here today with us who have really stood up in times of crisis and fought against inequality in their communities and in their countries to contribute to the greater good and really to ensure a better future for the generations of no matter what gender to come. Thank you once again for the opportunity to be here today.
Siamo noi a ringraziare lei, ambasciatore, per le sue
Thank
parole.
you, Ambassador, for your words and your participation and your support. Let me give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Caroline Gabriela Wiegers, Ambassador to the Netherlands, to the Holy See. Over to you, Ambassador. Grazie.
Thank you. Can you confirm you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Okay, thank you. Women, Crisis and Resilience, the thought-provoking title of this webinar. First, let me to a linguistic reflection, actually a bit in line with the opening of the intervention by Nadine Yashi. Whereas resistance implies firm opposition, the word resilience suggests the capacity to bounce back. Whereas a tree or a house or any structure that is big, strong and hard may snap or break in a storm. The flexible twig and the earthquake-proof building are capable of quickly returning to a normal condition after a difficult situation or event. I am wondering whether WUCWO had a similar image in mind when preparing this virtual meeting on the occasion of International Women's Day. The annual global event, this time 2 years after 2 years of a pandemic, which put the position of many women, notably the ones already in a vulnerable position, under even more pressure. This time also immediately after war broke out in Europe, causing mayhem, misery and death. UN Resolution 1325 required parties in a conflict to prevent violations of women's rights, to support women's participation in peace negotiations and in post-conflict reconstruction, and to protect women and girls from wartime sexual violence. Though adopted unanimously by the UN Security Council in the year 2000, the impact of the resolution in conflict-affected countries has been limited. The United Nations has chosen as theme for this year's International Women's Day, Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow, intending to recognize the contribution of women and girls around the world to building a more sustainable future for all. Independence, self-determination, and equality are principles considered essential by the Netherlands, and I am convinced by the other participants of today's webinar alike. These qualities are not the same at all as callousness, egotism, and uniformity. On the contrary, the emphasis is on the right to be oneself, each person realizing their full potential, striving to make a contribution to a better world, a world we want to respect, cherish, and preserve and enjoy. And this means that what we discuss today does not only have ecumenical and interreligious aspects, but is relevant to everyone, women and men, religious or not. Thank you.
Grazie a lei, ambasciatore, anche per averci...
Thank you, Ambassador, also for reminding us once again the meaning of the word resilience and that we are all involved in this. We are all together in this. Let me now give the floor to His Excellency Jorge Mario Isman, Ambassador of Colombia to the Holy See. Thank you for being with us, Ambassador. Over to you. Thank you. Thank you, Lavinia. A very special greeting to WUCWO for inviting us. I'd like to start by inviting you to think how precisely in this moment, in the midst of cruelty and devastation, we are all witnessing, and I'm referring to an unjust war, we are all witnesses. We are all seeing how millions of people all over the world are speaking up to defend, to advocate for the lives of the most vulnerable, and in particular women and children. We are all reading and seeing about in the news. And there are many expressing their solidarity, but in a country, Ukraine, where a war among brothers and sisters is being conducted. Now, my reflection is the following. A few years before the onset of the pandemic, this crisis gave me hope in humankind and humanity, because humanity finds the strength to move on, to move forward. And Pope Francis' encyclical letters like Fratelli Tutti are becoming more and more popular. He says that good politics, the good leadership, believes in love, hope, faith in the good that is in everyone's heart. So I would like to tell you something about the history of Colombia. In Colombia, there are about 50 million people. In the last 5 years, Colombia has received the second migration wave, the second greatest migration wave after the crisis, after the Syrian refugee crisis. It is estimated that around 1.7 million people from Venezuela are based now in Colombia because they had to flee. And of these 1.7 million, almost 50% is made up of female migrants, women migrants. We are talking about around 852,000 people, roughly the total population of Turin in Italy, for example. So this is the actual figure, the actual number of women getting to Colombia with different problems. So we have migration and the pandemic that we've experienced in the last 2 years. And of course, that poses challenges to the government in two very delicate fields. First, in sexual exploitation, because apparently there have been huge problems caused by sexual violence or sexual exploitation during the pandemic. migrants did not have anywhere to go, no homes, no work, and all that contributed to the increase in sexual violence. And also, you know, a lack of jobs, the loss of jobs. I'm Colombian and I'm very proud because we have been a good example of politics thanks to our statute for migrants. Migrants have the opportunity to access public services, public health services in Colombia. So this is a very important situation that the world can see as far as the challenges posed by this situation. We can be proud to be responding to an unprecedented migration challenge in Latin America through the temporary protection status for Venezuelan migrants. And of course, the challenges, despite all the progress that there has been, are there and are many. We need to help Venezuelan migrants to get access to the labor market. There are many women who didn't get any jobs, while men, it was easier for men to get a new job in Colombia. There has been also an increase in girls of pregnancy in girls aged less than 14 years. So that has to do with the increase in migration flows. And then the insertion of these migrants in our society, the challenge is huge, but the Colombian case can be useful to other countries. Now that with the Ukraine-Russia war, there will be flaws, greater flaws of migrants and refugees. Of this, you know, considering the help given by the government and and Caritas and the Catholic Women and many other organizations. So thank you. And then a message of faith and hope are so meaningful at these times, because now the attention is on migrants, it's on all the people who are suffering. Now let me give the floor to Maria Lia Servino, who will speak about the launch of the World Observatory on Women for Africa. Maria Lia, over to you. After listening to the panelists and their excellencies, to whom I'm deeply grateful, I think we have an open mind and an open heart to welcome this launch. We at the World Union of Catholic Women's Organizations thought that today, as we celebrate International Women's Day, is the right day to launch the World Observatory on Women in Africa. It's a sort of gift, I would say, for those suffering and resilient women who normally go unnoticed and are even discarded, as Pope Francis often says. Our observatory aims to listen to women from different regions of the planet, of any creed, nationality, and social condition, particularly the most vulnerable women who do not have the power to speak out, or if they do, it may be that no one notices and that their expressions are diluted in the sea of globalization of indifference. As Monica Santamarina explained, we have taken a first step in Latin America and the Caribbean, and now we're taking a second step to listen to and give voice to African women. After listening to Isabel Firi on the suffering and the resilience of women in Africa, perhaps many of us were struck again by Fratelli Tutti's denunciation, and I quote, "It is a fact that doubly poor are the women who suffer situations of exclusion, mistreatment, and violence because they often find themselves with fewer possibilities to defend their rights." End of quote. And what characterizes this Women's Observatory, of course, apart from the fact that it is based on gospel values and the teachings of the Catholic Church, well, it differs from other observatories because it does not seek a statistically powerful result, rather a qualitatively valuable one. It seeks to listen to women without mediation, to collect their testimonies directly at the grassroots level, to offer them the possibility to reflect on themselves and to express themselves in the knowledge, in the awareness, that being aware that they will be listened to. It yields a result as an existential observatory of women in the world, to which an academic basis has been added in the process of elaboration, which gives a scientific validity to its conclusion. The goal is to inspire and mobilize churches, civil society organizations, local and national governments, as well as international agencies, to find solutions together to the problems that affect women and our families through co-responsibility of men and women. That is why we are happy to know that our male friends are celebrating with us today. Thank you, dear friends. As Shahrazad Usman, Elena Viviani, Amsanda Giri, and Nadine Yarshi helped us reflect from their different perspectives that this situation is not exclusive to the African continent. This is why we will gradually extend the World Observatory of Women to all continents. I certainly hope that we can do this in collaboration and hand in hand with all of you. Participants from 70 countries, if you dream, as we do, of building together a fraternal humanity. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maria Lia. Now, before concluding, Let's open a moment of dialogue with the audience, with all of you participating in this event that is really connected from all over the world to pay tribute to women, like Unum Omnes, ACA. Now, I'd like to give them the floor for a brief comment or question. So let me ask Seamus MacDonald, President of Unum Omnes, the International Federation of Catholic Men. If I'm not mistaken, he's connecting from Ireland. If you could please unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Lavinia. Madam President and ladies from WUCWO, it is certainly a privilege as President of Unum Omnes to have this opportunity to join you here today. We are all brothers and sisters, all interconnected. Referring to Laudato Si, Pope Francis reminds us that the care for nature is part of a lifestyle which includes the capacity for living together and communion. He continues, Jesus reminds us that we have God as our common Father, and that makes us all brothers and sisters. Furthermore, in Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis reminds us that God has created all human beings equal in rights, duties, and dignity, and has called us all to live together as brothers and sisters. While WUCWO and Unum Omnes have their distinctive charisms, both are called to be missionaries to bring the gospel to our fellow brothers and sisters. Reflecting upon that mission, I am reminded of St. Monica, whose resilience, even in the face of adversity, continued to pray for her son, Augustine. And through her pleading, her prayers, he turned away from sin. Monica's love for Augustine is unconditional. Today in society, as I look at our female members, we witness the unconditional love of mothers who, like Monica, have that unconditional love for their families, struggling to ensure the faith is passed on. And our speakers here mentioned about the efforts they go to feed, to raise money, to support those. I, as President of Unum Omnes, hope that today is another step in close collaboration between WUCWO and ourselves. I must say that I am pleased to hear of the Observatory, which is launched today. I look forward to seeing that established in Europe. And this is an excellent initiative. And we, and Unum Omnes, congratulate you. And we look forward to the future, where there will be a possibility that there will be a similar observatory established in Europe. And we look forward to the benefits of that. Thank you very much for being here, and we wish you every success.
Grazie Seamus, grazie davvero per la partecipazione. Allora,
thank you, Seamus, for participating. Let me now give the floor to Monica very briefly. Will there be an observatory in Europe?
We want to launch the observatory. All the regions of the world. We have decided to start with Africa because there are many suffering women there. It's a very complicated region. Then, if God, our nations, allies, and friends of all the world permit, we will go on to the Asia Pacific region. Then we'll go to Europe and to North America. We really do want to go all over the world, and we're hopeful we'll make it.
grazie Monica. Ora
Thank you, Monica. Rafael Corso, the coordinator of the FIAC Secretariat and President of Catholic Action Argentina, is with us. Rafael, over to you. Thank you. Thank you, dear friends. It is a pleasure to be able to greet all those present at the celebration of the International Women's Day in the framework of this ecumenical and interreligious webinar, Women, Crisis and Resilience. We recognize the extraordinary service provided by WUCWO as a worldwide union of Catholic women's organizations in its role of promoting human dignity in every corner of the planet. The International Forum of Catholic Action as an international institutional space promotes the collaboration of the different Catholic actions for the world with the WUCWO, with the awareness of contributing to an integrated and articulated work between women and men without distinction of roles in places of institutional service, and cooperating in the promotion of women in those spaces where they are victims of discrimination. Pope Francis has called Catholic Action a gymnasium of synodality, because effectively, at the institutional level, there is no degree of differentiation or pre-qualification in the exercise of service functions. And this has been so since its historical birth, which has allowed us to permanently experience the extraordinary power of complementarity between women and men of all ages and all social conditions, from all cultures and latitudes of the planet. Showing the power of love as the constituent nucleus of the human family. Recently, Pope Francis told the members of the Women's Consultation of the Pontifical Council for Culture, women are protagonists of a church going forth through listening and caring for the needs of others, and with a marked capacity to sustain dynamics of justice in a climate of domestic warmth in the different social environments in which they find themselves working. Now, this capacity to generate bonds has been amply demonstrated in the period of the pandemic with the assistance to isolated and lonely people, needy families, destitute people cared for in dormitories, dining halls, picnic areas, welfare centers, parish caritas, accompaniment for addictions, violence, a plethora of daily and loving dedications that God and each recipient know in their true magnitude. Cardinal Eduardo Pironio, of happy memory and recently recognized as a venerable, told us on Holy Thursday back in 1971, we have an hour, and we have to love it with intensity, just as it is given, with all its risks and obscurities, also with all its possibilities and hopes. This hour, so difficult and hard, this hour, so rich and so full of God, it is the hour in which I must commit myself by dying a little bit every day to truly love my brothers and sisters. Finally, attentive to the suffering, responsibilities, and hopes of these hours of ours that emerged most visibly with the pandemic, and today with the painful and incomprehensible Russian invasion of Ukraine, we want to hope that just as we have fallen into destruction and death, awareness and clarification of intelligences and the strengthening of wills will allow us to regenerate the bonds of a true human family, in solidarity, in losses, and also in possibilities of truth, good, and beauty. I am grateful for this opportunity to share reflections, concerns, dreams, and hopes in an interreligious and ecumenical space with the international representation. And I would like to close this intervention with the words of His Holiness Pope Francis in his encyclical Letter Fratelli Tutti number 96. The ever-increasing number of interdependencies and intersecting communications on our planet makes more palpable the awareness that all the nations of the earth share a common destiny. In the dynamics of history, despite the diversity of ethnicities, societies, and cultures, we see sown the vocation to form a community made up of brothers and sisters who welcome one another and care for one another. End of quote. Love ultimately sets us intention towards universal communion. No one matures or reaches his or her fullness in isolation. By its very dynamic, love calls for a growing openness, a greater capacity to welcome others. And to conclude, Jesus told us, "You are all brothers." Thank you on behalf of PIAC, and thank you to all panelists and participants. Congratulations on the launching of your observatory. Thank you, Rafael, for your beautiful words. Now, very quickly, let me give the floor to Alejandra Segura, President of the Red de Mujeres Católicas de la Academia de Líderes Católicos.
Thank you so much, Lavinia and Maria Lia. Congratulations for the observatory. On behalf of the International Network of Catholic Women, we are much honored to have been invited to this enriching and enlightening webinar with profound insights shared by all the distinguished speakers who preceded me. Our International Network of Catholic Women was created more than a year ago, conformed by women coming together from all over the world, like we are doing today, to strengthen bonds of fraternal friendship, to work for peace, solidarity, and prosperity in the world, as stated in our network manifesto on March 8, 2021. Resilience speaks loud to us as we believe and defend the transcendence of the contribution of women in the search of creative and innovative solutions to the problems of our time. Resilience, as a unique and special gift from God to women, is a gift not only for the family, but also for society and the church. Resilience leads every woman to give herself selflessly, to give herself to others, and to be that social force that follows in the footsteps of all those women who have preceded us, contributing to transform history. Resilience can have a twofold effect. On one hand, it empowers women. As a result, women go beyond bouncing back and survival. They are transformed, reinforcing the strongholds of values and traditions women carry, becoming a covenant for future generations. On the other hand, though, resilience can also make women more prone to ongoing unjust discrimination and violence. Women should not be called to suffer injustice of any kind. Relentless inequity damages the social fabric, leaving individuals and whole communities vulnerable. Resilience should not take us, women, into hiding these sufferings. Peace of the world can only be achieved by starting with every woman's heart being at peace. Lastly, but most importantly, resilience allows us women to live the joy of the gospel, becoming a bright beacon of hope for the whole world. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Grazie davvero Alejandra Segura. Ora do subito la
Thank
parola.
you, Alejandra Segura. Now, Mr. Elias Chiniki, Secretary General of Religions for Peace of Latin America and the Caribbean. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Good afternoon to all of you, especially to our women present here on the International Day of Women. It is a great honor for me to be here with all of you. So thank you, Maria Leah, for giving me the opportunity to be here. And my apologies to all of you, because you've been listening all these voices, but here in Latin America, for the first time at the International Center for Dialogue, we are organizing a program to help people live interreligious dialogue. And so I'm sure that together with Maria Leah and WUCWO and other Catholic organizations, other religious institutions, we can really form and train many women in religious dialogue, interreligious dialogue. Religions for Peace has been working for more than 10 years. We created a global network, and the reason was the following. We had noticed back then that there were not many people from the religious world. The main characteristic of our organization is to invite religious leaders, and they were men in their majority. And so we built a program for women, which led to the creation of our network in order to have women of faith as leaders in our region. So it is a great joy for us to know that Maria Leah is one of the 3 Latin American women who are part of our council and international co-president. So here in our region, and together with WUCWO, right from the start of our network back in 2002, we've seen the participation of WUCWO as to the Latin American network. Many of our members are here and are participating in this webinar today to celebrate the International Women's Day. So, dear sisters, dear friends, women, I'd like to thank you for accompanying us in this journey. I'm sure that, and I hope that we will be able to see one another in presence.
Muchas gracias.
So, thank you. Thank you, Elias. I'm afraid our time's up. I think we don't have time for more questions or contributions. We hope next time we will have more time for your questions. I know that there have been questions referring to the results of the Women's Observatory in Latin America. So
questo incontro perché abbiamo già superato il tempo stabilito. Ringrazio a nome dell'UMOFC.
We need to conclude this meeting, but first I thank on behalf of WUCWO His Eminence Cardinal Ayuso. I thank our speakers for their valuable testimonies, all the ambassadors to the Holy See, our interpreters and WUCWO staff, all the more than 400 participants from all over the world. So our staff members, our dear interpreters who helped us so much today. We hope next year we will be able to celebrate these events in present. The recording of this webinar will be available on WUCWO YouTube channel from next week in the different languages. So again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you all very much for being with us.